goodness, starting out late. It is unlike me. For the general. Yeah. Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. The first thing is to review and approve the agenda, and I don't think that there are any changes relative to what is printed online. So, and you know what we have in paper here. So, are there any changes people would like to see to the agenda? Okay, so without objection, we'll consider the agenda approved. So the next thing is general business and appearances. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the council on a topic that is otherwise not on our agenda. If the item is on the agenda, then if you would wait till that item comes up, and then you can speak then. And then if you have anything to say, and this is true generally throughout the meeting, if you would say your name and where you live, and try to keep your comments to 2 minutes. Yep.
My name is Seth Collins. I live in Berlin, Vermont. And I would like to request I'd like to request Montpelier City Hall to set up a task force to create this to start creating this neighborhood watch. I'll keep it short. I have another meeting to go to, but thanks for letting me speak.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So moving on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Move the consent agenda.
Second. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So, and we have an Above and Beyond award.
We do. I was actually just looking. I don't see the recipient here. Do we know if he's planning to attend?
He's working.
He could be.
So I guess I'm going to try and say this for the record. I think that Dan Perry...
Introduce yourself.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Donna Barlow, Casey, Public Works Director. Our staff needs to be in at 4 a.m. tomorrow. He's the streets foreman. I think he went home with the rest of our guys. That's where he is, so he can do his job tomorrow. Maybe you could give a little description. So for those that don't know, once a month we give an Above and Beyond award to a city employee. It's nominated by fellow city employees, and then they're recognized internally and here at the council meeting. So this month's winner is named Dan Perry. He's just a newly promoted superintendent or supervisor of our streets division, and he has, particularly with this winter with staff shortages, has really stepped up and filled in the role even before his formal promotion. He's done a lot to reduce salt. He's one of those folks that just comes out. I noticed he had just answered an email to someone just right before this meeting, a citizen concerned about things, and so some of his fellow employees recognized that and nominated him, and our team that looks at these agreed. So we'd just like to thank Dan Perry for his service. We thought he was going to be here to be recognized, but
he's so dedicated to the city that he's preparing for tomorrow at 4 a.m.
Exactly. That's right. So there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and congratulations to Dan.
Yes.
It's very exciting. Anything further on that?
No.
Okay. All right, so the next item is a climate emergency resolution. And I know there are some folks here who would like to speak to that. And there are a number of folks, and so I would also just urge you to keep your comments to 2 minutes if you can. That'd be great. And then, so we'll have public comment, and then we'll have some discussion with the council. So anyone who would like to make a comment about the climate resolution? Yes.
Or sit.
Hi, I'm Kelly McCracken. I live here in town. I helped work on this, and I just want to say that the intent of this emergency declaration is twofold: to both hold up the city as a model and to hold its feet to the fire. We want to acknowledge the city's leadership on climate and support its ambitious efforts to achieve city-based net zero emissions by 2030 and community-wide net zero by 2050. The city has adopted these goals, and now the plan and timeline to reach them must be created with both speed and thoughtfulness. The whole city must mobilize to meet these goals. Residents and students at MSMS and MHS have worked together, meeting with members of the council and MEAC to create this declaration. And we ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan Jones. I want to support the idea of declaring a climate emergency. Sadly feel that this particular declaration is caught in the weeds and doesn't actually address the crisis in any meaningful way. And I'm saddened that this declaration walks back the 2014 commitment to only now apply to city operations by 2030. It pushes off an actual commitment for citywide changes until 2050, and only then frames actions in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. That horse left the barn. The recent IPCC report tells us all that if we don't massively shift our consumption and behavior by 2030, it's game over. I respectfully propose that the Council consider a real climate emergency declaration, which would recognize that the climate crisis effects are here and now, not off in some preventable future. We already find our water system is compromised by unexpected freeze-thaw cycles. Our roads and systems will get worse from here on in. This year, we've already had 5 January thaws in January. We see increases in sewage overflows and in stormwater events. Yet somehow the city goes on as if this situation is normal and can be contained with traditional approaches of orderly infrastructure replacement. An emergency situation requires preparation of and commitment to an emergency response. A true emergency response will require public commitment to changing current land and water use and infrastructure plans such that we might prepare to actually survive a climate change future. For instance, are we going to continue to dedicate our downtown real estate to parking lots, assuming that we're always going to be a commuter hub for rural sprawl? In a real emergency, the city must be prepared to actively subsidize new transit as part of reorganizing our current transport and utility systems. Our city needs a process of real internal accounting of the true state of current expenditures for repairing the climate damages. Like how many water main breaks does it take before we have to fix that problem? Responding to the growing real emergency will require concrete mechanisms to support sustainable investment that will provide future security and well-being for our citizens. Declaring a climate emergency without being prepared to create real adaptation has little value in defining what we need to demand of ourselves in this ever more challenging future. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm a page curtain. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read the resolution. Is it possible to read it? Or is it too long?
I don't think it's too long.
Does anybody else want to hear it, or do you all?
I mean, maybe.
Okay.
It's about a page and 3/4.
Never mind. Never mind. It's okay. I'll read it. Say what you.
We could, well, I was going to say, we could read the be it further
someone's
resolved.
giving it.
Oh, you've got it, okay. Is that sufficient page? Page that works for you?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
It starts where I handed it to you.
Okay. Further comments?
Diane Kagan, Montpelier. I really would like to understand what this council understands the word emergency to mean. I think that was raised by Greta Thunberg at the World Economic Conference this past month. And I think she posed it to all of us. I don't know if there are any high school kids here, but they've really shown the way in demanding that the city and the state act in accordance with reality and not with our wishes. As a citizen of Montpelier who does not drive a car, I'm going to tell you this is a car town. Several people have been killed right here on Main Street, and no one has been held responsible for it. When I comb my hair in the morning after I've been walking about in the fresh air of Montpelier, I can't even tell you what comes out of it. And I'm not the only one. The water situation here and the state of affairs with the river really needs to be addressed. I walk. I only live a few blocks from downtown. But it's black ice and puddles. The kids can't walk safely on Hubbard Street. Is a traffic emergency. So I really support the idea of a climate emergency, but I'd like to see us actually address things in a manner that you would deal with emergency. Like when your house is on fire, do you wait till 2050 to put it out? No. You know, I mean, the well-to-do in Montpelier are going to do fine. They've got their houses up in God knows where. You know, but the people on the streets of the city who actually have to walk and take public transportation are in dire distress. You know what I mean? I'm just speaking from the heart here because a lot of people in this town are tired of it, and people are going to start leaving. I mean, I will not stay in this town if the situation continues this way. Not that my absence would be missed particularly, but it's not a livable situation unless you've got a lot of money, and then you can go off and ignore it and put a lot of gas in your 3 SUV vehicles and drive your Jeep up in the hills and go skiing I don't know where. So I think it's also a question of class that we have to consider, and whether all the citizens are going to benefit from this activity, and that's all I've got to say.
Thank you.
I'm moving to France.
I'm Lena D'Onofrio. I'm in 7th grade. And I'd just like to say that I believe Montpelier should declare climate emergency because the communities most vulnerable to climate change are those with the fewest resources available. And we are a community that has the means and resources to hold itself accountable for its emissions, and yet the amount of carbon Vermont's been emitting has been consistently going up. We must take steps to lower the negative impacts our city has on the environment and do the hard work necessary to get to net zero. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Lynn Wild, and I live here in Montpelier on St. Paul Street. 5 years ago, we began planting trees on St. Paul Street. It's called the St. Paul Street Tree Project. That was a project of the Montpelier Tree Board, the neighbors on St. Paul Street, and the church on the corner. Together, we added 23 trees to that street to try to make up for the 10 large maple trees that had died over the past decade. Adding plants and trees to our yards and to improve the diversity of living species in our yards is a focus that we can all take, whether we have a yard of our own or if we want to add them to other people's yards or join up in partnership with people who have really large properties and are willing to let us work with them. The little trick to this is they need to be native plants, and I just discovered this myself. I've been really gung-ho about this whole thing, more diversity, more diversity, more diversity, but the caveat is that the insects that we need must be used to eating the plants that we plant. And if we plant diverse species that are not native to our local region, then we are not going to be able to feed them. And that's really the bottom line here. We've got to begin feeding the different insects that used to live here, because those are the things that the birds feed on, and those are the things that start creating the plant health in our environment and the soil health. So, not to lecture or anything, but just saying it's complicated. So I invite you, and the tree board invites you to join us and to ask us to plant trees in your yard, to join with the Friends of the Winooski to plant trees along the riverbanks, to hold the soil in place, to create the diversity on the riverbanks that then creates more insects that should live here, that can fight the insects we don't want. Only 1% of the insects give us any problem. There's a whole million of other insects that we could be supporting if we choose the right native plants in the right places with the trees. So Lynn Wild, Tree Board, join us, Friends of the Winooski River. We're planning and for planting in May. May Tree City is coming. Let's do it. Let's get on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Darrell Bloom. I live in Montpelier on Summer Street. I don't have prepared remarks, but I did read the declaration presented to the council, and I urge you to support it. What could be more reasonable? Think of the number of times you've heard adults say to children, "Come on now, be reasonable." What could be more reasonable than for us to be asked to make an actual plan to meet the goals that we all know are important? We know those goals are important. We know there may not really be enough, but they'll get us going in the right direction. Lynn's talk is a perfect example of the resources that exist in the community, and the plan encourages you to listen to all of the community in creating a plan to reach those goals. So I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right, so comments from council. Do you want to start, Lauren? You don't have to.
I mean, I'll just say a few words. And then, so just first of all, really appreciate the students and parents and adults who did a lot of work putting this together, looking at what, a lot of communities all over the globe have declared climate emergencies already. We wouldn't even be the first city in the state of Vermont. Burlington beat us to the punch. So this is something that's happening all over, and I think a lot of the comments that have come out tonight of our house is on fire and we need to start acting like it are really resonate with me. I do think we have set goals, but without accountability and plans to get there, and embedding this how we do our business into the city's operations, then we're not going to make the kind of transformative change that I think we need. So I do think this emergency, we need to be doing more sooner, faster on the climate emergency. I think putting a plan in place to do that and being as bold and ambitious as we can in that, I would encourage us to do. And I would encourage everyone who's here tonight and the many other community members really passionate and really concerned about the climate crisis to hold the city accountable to developing a really good plan and then following through on actually implementing it so that whoever's here is being held accountable to doing the kind of work that needs to get done, and that's both driving down our own pollution that we're contributing, but also building and investing in a city that will be resilient over the long term, from our infrastructure to our food systems and everything in between. So I encourage us to support this and look forward to the discussion.
Dan, and then Donna.
Could I say one more?
Oh, no,
thing?
not right now. But perhaps later. But we're going to have council discussion. Yes.
Sure. I just had a couple of questions. One of which, maybe Lauren, you can answer this, and comes from my being new on the council. But so, what type of group came up with this, as far as the planning and work that went into drafting this resolution?
So there were just Montpelier residents who were looking at what was happening and were concerned about the issue so some of the folks who spoke tonight were the ones who drafted and wrote this and did a lot of research on what the city had done. They presented at the Montpelier Energy Action Committee and got some input from that group in terms of some of the substance that's in here that speaks directly to the city's goals and operations. But that's my understanding of what's went into it.
And then who would, I mean, obviously it says that the city council would create and adopt the plan, but would we see a subcommittee then out of this? Or is this more of a, yes, we need to make a plan and let the details fall forward?
So two things. One, if you would pull your mic a little closer when you talk. Two, so the first part, the 2030 goal for city operations, that is embedded in the FY21 budget currently, so that is underway, which is great. And then, but we do not yet have plans to develop a 2050 plan. But that, yeah.
But I guess, my question is, to whom would the work fall? Are we looking at creating a task force of this, or is this an internal city process where a department would take the lead on it?
Go ahead.
I mean, this would be probably overseen mostly by MEAC, the Montpelier Energy Advisory Committee, with a consultant. We would contract out the work to sort of lead the research and that kind of thing, and then present through MEAC. Obviously, we'd have city staff involved, probably our public works director, and then report through MEAC and then to the council to adopt the plan.
And then is the envisionment, sorry, I'm just asking questions as opposed to necessarily expressing opinion, but I want to make sure I fully understand and everyone understands as well. Then are we envisioning a plan that would then be binding upon the city, that we would vote upon, that would then control how we would make these plans such that, future plans, future councils, future departments would be bound by this plan that we adopt?
I would equate it to other plans the city has, which are guiding documents. And because really, these plans that are talked about here are going to need to come up with like the nuts and bolts of, okay, but how are you actually going to accomplish that? Right. And that's where the creativity, I mean, this is sort of like it's almost like a blank slate. It's like it's not quite true. It's the framework. It's like the foundation that we can build on for creating what will actually happen. But that, as a plan, it wouldn't be binding unless we made it binding.
Okay.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I was just going to follow into that. Normally, these plans would come with a series of action recommendations, and then obviously we would go through and choose the actions we were going to take, and some of them could go into ordinance, and it could always be undone by future councils. That any of our regulations can be
sure.
Or
strengthened.
Okay.
And it may be worth noting that the city is currently working on its city plan, which has an energy chapter, which does get to some of these strategies.
Well, that actually anticipated. I just wondered how that would then meld with our city plan, which would, as you say, include an energy chapter, and I would see it focused on that, and how this would be different than that section.
I'd see it as being more robust. Okay. I mean, it would just have more detail and length, and to the extent that it either differed or expanded upon the city plan, we could amend the plan, that chapter to address those, more detailed responses.
Well, and I'll end so the others have a chance to talk. But my concern obviously is we want to make sure that if we do create a document like this, that it is consistent and supported by other planning documents, that it doesn't sit at odds with those, and we're not setting some goals in one document and other goals in another, as well as, and I could see a document like this being more robust and more looking at a bigger slice of the pie, yet, in some ways the city plan is intended to be that way. So I could see this working hand in glove, and maybe we're looking beyond, and obviously by these dates, we're looking beyond the 5-year sort of city plan that we would normally have. So I appreciate the answers and the time for the questions.
Thank you. Donna.
I definitely can support making a motion to make a plan. I have some questions about the date and need to talk to Bill, and some of the answers to Dan is about staffing. How much of our staff? Because we do have new directors, new city office staff, so that concerns me as far as 2020. And I think an FY year, so I think of FY '21, because budget and staff planning goes with that way. So I feel comfortable, more comfortable with saying it would be completed by the end of FY '21 as a motion. But within the resolution, I have 5 different groupings of questions. And I did send them to you, Lauren, ahead of time. And some of them are real basic. I don't know you need such a detailed resolution, but some of the wording bothers me, such as in the very beginning. It says to mitigate damage due to climate change and to restore a safe climate. I don't know what a safe climate is.
350 parts per million.
What?
350 parts per million of CO2, I think would be a fair.
Is that, okay, then I guess I need something like, okay. We can do that. Okay.
So we could, it could be more specific like that to help define.
If it, yeah, I mean, I guess, if that's the goal here, to me, that kind of specific goal really needs to go in the plan. And this is just a statement saying, we have these issues, and we may resolve that we want to do a plan to resolve them, versus trying to list each and every one within the resolution. I find it a little clumsy.
Sorry, I'm not even finding that language. Maybe I'm just
It's in
not
the very
seeing it.
first paragraph, very first sentence, the heading.
I see. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry.
no,
Yep.
no, okay. So that was my initial question. And then, when you go on and it says, whereas Vermont has already experienced, I'm still thinking local, Vermont, Montpelier, and I felt that, like some of the statements, that we have a lot of damage already with streets, so that we have real problems of cost to our infrastructure and to staff time when we have a utility line go because of all these extreme ranges of temperatures. So I feel that in that 1, 2, 3rd whereas, that could be very much more specific. If you're going to mention Montpelier, we have these problems right now that are costing us money for infrastructure and staff time. And then on the second, well, mine's the second page, it's near 1, 2, 3, 4, like the 5th paragraph from the bottom. And I do think Montpelier can be a leader and an example for others, but I'm less comfortable with some of this commitment to global, to reverse global warming. I mean, it just jumps out there. It's like, whoa. So maybe I'm thinking more directly that we do our little pond and we try to do it well, and that will lead others to follow us. But anyway, so that was my issue. And then the 4th one is the first, be it further resolved. That's the timing issue. I feel more comfortable with FY '21. And then the very last one, it gets into so much language, I have no idea what it means. I'm uncomfortable with them, that's all.
Sorry, the last?
The very last one, that will investigate radical gas, greenhouse gases, transportation heater sector, gas withdrawal opportunities, soil, carbon, it goes on and on and on. Is that like they're listing everything? I just like, why list anything instead of more of a broader heading? In some cases, scientifically, I guess it gets too specific for me, and in other cases, it gets too global. So I'm sorry to be fussy. But.
Do you have any language change suggestions you want to offer?
I don't know enough about the scientific topic.
Okay.
That's why I sent it ahead, hoping that maybe there would be some heads, some experts that could add to this. I just would like us to have more time and not feel like we have to do it tonight. That we can take in some of the comments and try to help trim it down to be more specific Montpelier, but not so intensely specific with all the things that are going wrong. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to flag that, all of those thoughts. I mean, and let's come back to it, if that's okay. Other council comments? Glenn, and then Connor. Yep.
Again, thanks for everyone coming out and doing the work on this. I think I hear the concerns about the language. I think I'm perfectly willing to see some of those changes and I support it as written, really. It reads broad enough and specific enough for me, and as far as I can tell, it does commit us only to doing what we have already said we are going to do and what we will need to do, plans for 2030 and 2050. As far as the timing goes, end of FY21 versus end of this year, 2020, I guess to me it feels urgent enough to have a plan to get 2030 that we should just do it now. By the end of 2020 feels adequate to me, especially because we have already been planning for it to some extent. I share some of the commenters' fears that even if we do manage to meet these goals that we've set for ourselves, may still be inadequate. But I think that as written for now, this is certainly something that I can support.
Connor.
Yeah, no, I agree with some of the concerns. I think you could look at some of this language and say, maybe it's a bit duplicative of other policies we have. I think you could also make the criticism that doesn't go far enough. Dan Jones, a lot of his points hit pretty hard there. And what I like about Sustainable Montpelier is they actually have tangible ideas on how to get us on track here. So I think we would benefit from bringing them in more and hearing more about those ideas. Microtransit being an example that's actually going to come to fruition, hopefully. But I think when it comes down to it for me, any resolution is a bit hollow unless you do the work and follow up. And I can't tell you how much I admire just the students in this community who camp out on the State House lawn in the cold, who go in the streets, put themselves on the line. And what I see this as an evolution in sort of the movement that they've created for their own future. It's not about just going to the streets and taking action. It's about putting some ideas on the table, working with elected officials, lobbying them. I got a ton of emails over the course of the week, very, very well written, very passionate about this. And I think what I would ask the students back is this is not the end of the conversation. If we pass this in itself is not a remedy. You need to hold us accountable and continue coming to the council meetings, continue hammering some of these issues. But again, the passion I see, the work they've done, I would have a lot of trouble voting against this resolution. I think this is a really good step for them to take there. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Jack, do you have anything you want to add?
Very little. I'm very happy to vote in favor of this resolution just as it's written. If there are enough people who think that we should spend more time working on it before we adopt it, I have no problem with giving members the time to do that and be totally comfortable with it and take it up again next time.
Sorry, so you're suggesting that maybe we send it back to the community members who are working on this for some language edits potentially and come back for next week or next meeting?
Yeah, I'm ready to vote yes tonight, but I also like the idea of having everybody be
on board. Yeah,
right in support of it.
I'd like to just ask Kelly McCracken to come back up here, if you wouldn't mind. As someone who was instrumental in putting this together, my question is really how would you feel about doing that based on some of the comments or clarifications that you've heard? Or
I feel fine about that.
You do? Okay.
I agree that my personal declaration would ask for a lot more. And I feel really good about just pushing the council to do what I know what you already want to do. Yeah. So I don't think I took issue. I don't know. I'd have to look at it, but no, that's okay. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I also just want to say that a lot of the language that's not specific to us comes from other climate mobilization, the whole climate mobilization movement. And we really tried to edit it to make it as specific as possible, but yeah.
Perhaps we
Not
can add
lawyers,
some.
not,
Yeah, we can add some Montpelier-specific things and maybe clarify some of the points. Lauren?
I think that sounds great, and if you're willing, thank you for for you and all the
I mean, I don't know that
team
I can
who
change it. Like, I was happy with this, so, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd have to understand what I'm doing.
Sure.
But I would do it if I understood what I was doing.
Yeah. I think some of it just seemed like either let's keep it all Montpelier specific with the examples at the beginning, which seems fine, and maybe define safe climate, put a different phrase in that makes more sense to you. I mean, it didn't bother me, but that seems like totally solvable. Like, you raised the issue of national advocacy. Like, I mean, I know that I think we do some national advocacy on climate. We're part of national networks. I would not want to take that out. I think if there's opportunities for Montpelier to be part of a bigger city movement on climate, that we should absolutely do that. So I would push back on that one and say, I think that's limited. We don't do a lot of that. Most of this is all about what our city is doing, but I wouldn't want to take out that's something we would possibly look for opportunities, and I know the city already has before. So that one I would just put that out there. And then finally, the most substantive seems like the date of the plan. I mean, I think it seems kind of ironic to say it's a climate emergency. Let's take a year and a half to make a plan. Like, I think 2020 as a calendar year seems, given the work that's underway, like if there were, not going to be funding, like if we physically couldn't make it work, but it seems like we can do our best to try to get one done in the 2020 calendar year. I just saw a half-hearted maybe nod, so I'll take that as a firm. Let's do it.
Well, a work plan.
Obviously, we will strive to do what you ask us to do. The funding that we approved in the budget, starts July 1. Yeah. Now, we could probably, speed that up by having us ready to go for July 1. And obviously, I'm actually more concerned about the subsequent year because we haven't considered funding for a fiscal year that begins July 1, 2021 into 22. So we're making a promise, and presumably the first plan is going to drive what the second plan is, but again, you're the council, you're going to decide what we budget. So if you're making that commitment, then we'll do it. For us, it would just make more sense to have them line up with the fiscal year, but we'll do our best, and you will do our best to have it come out when you want it. But
Well, I mean, if we don't fund the second part, that would be the classic unfunded mandate,
right,
which has never occurred before in the history of government. But, I think this first plan is important enough that if what I'm hearing from you is that having it go to the deadline of fiscal year 2021, I mean, basically June 30th of next year, I'd rather have that plan done right, because it would be the first step, than to rush it to meet some goal that we set here on paper because it sounds good on paper. Sorry, and I'll let you answer. To me, the issues with the language, especially in the whereas clauses, I mean, whereas clauses are just whereas clauses. They're not binding.
You don't take them serious, okay?
No one takes them.
Then why do it?
Well, because they do. They sort of set the background and the general tone. And so I'm not so. I'll just say that's my own personal take, is that I'm not as bothered by that, and I think it's a good idea if if we've made this commitment to this plan, and if we all recognize this is a climate emergency, to start taking action. And so to me, the real nut of this is to take action in a way that's going to go beyond the page and is going to result in policy and plans that we can follow that will be consistent with other plans that we're making, so that we do start to bend the use of our both carbon and our infrastructure to support these issues, and we do it right, as opposed to doing it either rushed or doing it as a series of ongoing resolutions. so we push more paper and we feel good about ourselves. I mean, I'd really like to see this as the first step and then see a plan.
Jack, and then I have a comment. Yeah.
As this discussion's been going on about the completion date of this plan, it occurs to me that if we want to be in a position to be considering whatever we put in the plan as we build the fiscal year 2022 budget, probably we should have it done by December of this year, so then that can be an input for the next fiscal year's budget.
So to address some of your comments, Donna, I have some suggestions. And so rather than perhaps sending it back to the folks who helped write it, maybe there's some easy language changes that we could make right now if they're amenable to you in the group. And if they also satisfy you, Donna.
I'm the only one that's concerned.
No,
that's
well, that's.
As I said, I can make the motion now to do the plan. I have no issue about the plan.
If we're going to do it, let's do it right.
I take resolutions serious. What can I do?
That's good. That's good. Okay, so about the first part, restoring a safe climate, because that was vague. My interpretation of that is that is. The first part is damage due to climate change, and then to restore a safe climate really means reducing greenhouse gases.
Oh, okay.
So I would suggest that we strike restore a safe climate and put in reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because that's what I think that's trying to accomplish. Under the third whereas, where you have Vermont has already experienced long-term warming, extreme weather events, serious flooding, and I would suggest adding after that, Montpelier has experienced multiple water main breaks, in part due to extreme freeze-thaw cycles and more frequent major storm and snow events. This is a couple examples of Montpelier-specific impacts. And then the next part, you had some questions about the dates.
I didn't realize we did global lobbying. I know that we are advocating as a city when we meet with other cities, but I really didn't know we did global lobbying. I thought lobbying is a very distinct.
I'll speak for myself and say that I have done that. I've been to some national conferences talking about our efforts, which is great.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think, that's sharing and being a mentor. That's fine. Okay.
Okay.
Great. If you do that now, we'll just check it off. Just
Okay.
leave that paragraph alone.
As for the dates, I'm hearing some disagreement about whether to change it to FY21 or FY20, so maybe
Jack
we'll...
made a good point there.
Yes, I agree. So I think if it's pushing us to go a little faster, maybe that's okay, unless it's going to take away from the authenticity of it. But we can have more conversation about that. And then you had some concerns about what is involved in that last paragraph. I am happy to talk about any of those things in like a 20-second explanation on any of those.
You feel comfortable with them, I'll sign off, Ann.
Okay.
It's on your head.
Well, if you have that question, if just because I'm a teacher, maybe I'll just do it anyway. Just take 20 seconds. It's an opportunity, right, to talk about what's that? Yeah, right, exactly. I need the whiteboard. We're gonna draw some equations. No, so I think people understand tree planting.
Yep.
Soil carbon sequestration. So a lot of carbon is stored in soil, particularly in roots and mycelium, and just other organisms that live. There's a whole ecosystem underground, helps store carbon, and some of that is even old plant matter that's just under layers.
Right. If it sits long enough, it becomes coal.
And so there are things we can do to increase carbon sequestration. Planting trees is one of them, but there are other things you can do to increase sequestration. One of those things actually is pyrolysis, which is a process by which you heat up material to very high temperatures under pressure, and organic material will sort of turn into charcoal. Some of it vaporizes, and you can burn it, and that you are still burning some of that carbon then. But some of it becomes in basically a locked state, so it's out of the sort of decomposition cycle for carbon. It sort of takes it out of the carbon cycle, if that makes any sense. So that has some potential. Reduction of food waste, we know a lot of that food waste right now, in July, theoretically, we will not be throwing food waste into the trash, but that is an opportunity for us to explore potentially some more robust composting opportunities, particularly with the city. So we're going to actually, Donna and, anyway, there's a group that's working on that. And then climate adaptive land use planning. We know that climate solutions really are also about land use planning, which I think we know. Does that, well, and it mentions transportation and heating sectors. Transportation is the highest sector of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, followed by the heating sector. Is that satisfactory?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you for, sorry, that was probably 5 minutes. Sorry, that was too.
Now, it doesn't include everything that Dan would like to see in it.
Oh, for sure. And I would say this is not this shouldn't be an exhaustive list. And some of these avenues may not prove fruitful, and that's okay. But that's satisfactory to you?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And I really got the point that Jack made about the date.
Yeah.
Particularly because I didn't know before that we have the money in our Montpelier Energy Group. For a consultant, you said there was
We
money
have
there.
the money, to be clear.
Starts July 1, the money does. I got
Right,
that.
but we can
start working.
strive to have it done by the end of 2020, and that's great. I'm not trying to be obstructive. I just don't know how long the planning process is going to take. We haven't hired a consultant. We don't know what their plan is. We don't know what work they're going to do. So that's my concern.
Yeah.
But I think to set that as I guess the concern is we say this, and then on the first meeting in January, we've got a room full of people saying, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. So and I mean that facetiously, not really, but I take, if we pass this, the commitment would be that we would start probably as soon as the budget passed, if it passes in March, and then, start prepping and doing the RFPs and all that stuff, so we're ready to roll instead of starting that whole process in July. And that, they'll tell us how long, I don't have any idea what's involved in doing one of these
So
plans.
if they find out a different date, then they come back to us and we amend it.
And we can let us-
At least
or we
we were
just know
consciously doing it, okay. That's the planning.
The committee.
Yes.
I know.
Okay.
Actually, this other lady wanted to say something before. If you would like to make another comment.
I would just like to make a raise a methodological question, because I've been studying this since 1971 when we cleaned up oil spills in California, I've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks watching the WEF, World Economic Forum sessions on the climate emergency. So, one, the whole world right now is reeling over the latest scientific revelations, which indicate that things are moving much faster than anybody thought. One of the reasons that happened, and I read a very interesting scientific paper on this, is that the scientists themselves were reluctant to come to the conclusion about what was actually happening until they had consensus.
If you wouldn't mind speaking into the microphone so that people at home can hear you also. Thank you.
I'm sorry. It's
okay.
I'm used to being on the stage. Anyway, so the scientists themselves, the key planetary scientists themselves have, revealed that they were slow to come to the conclusion about what was happening. And one of the reasons for this had to do with the necessity for consensus among scientists themselves before they told the rest of the planet what was going on. So secondly, I think that, I'm all for a plan. The plan needs to be in concert, because we're a town that's trying to deal with town what the town is about, but we also part of planet. And to my knowledge, very little weather comes out of Vermont to anywhere else. We get weather from everywhere that delivers, it's like you're here and like what? Chicago's coming today, Maine's coming tomorrow, Alaska's coming the next day. We're getting it.
I'm going to interrupt you because you're at about 2
And I'm
minutes.
going to just stop now.
Okay.
I'm willing to work on this, okay? Because I'm willing to work on this. I'm going to live here. I'm willing to help and vision a consultative process so that the experts that you get on the advisory committee are dealing with what they need to deal with.
Thank you.
And I'm hats off to everybody who's trying to save the planet.
So there was a mention earlier that somehow this, whatever is done, is in the bailiwick of MEAC, the Energy Committee. I was informed at the last MEAC meeting when I tried to bring up the issue of resilience that really the Energy Committee only deals with energy. I think we're facing something that actually has to do with the whole systems problem in the city, which includes infrastructure, includes systems, includes land planning, et cetera, that we are missing it by putting things on the energy. Like I said, that horse is out of the barn, as she just said. What we're going to be experiencing is the effect of the carbon pollution put in California, India, China, et cetera. What we do here is going to be minimal. What we are going to have to respond to is going to be huge, and so I would like to propose that the city consider a resilience committee, for lack of a better word, that would look at some of the issues of both land use, infrastructure, transportation, and energy as a total picture, as a way of addressing this, because I think the Energy Committee has already said this is not their bailiwick. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any further comment on the resolution, or is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution endorsing the declaration of climate emergency and emergency mobilization effort to mitigate damage due to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions as presented and as modified by the mayor's suggestions in the third whereas clause. And I'll keep it as a plan for the end of 2020.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. I just want to look back there. Does that sound okay? Okay. Further comments? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you all, and thank you so much for your good work on this, and I look forward to filling out some of the steps as to how we're going to move towards energy independence, reducing our fossil fuel use. Deeply important.
I got some notes too, Kristen.
Okay.
We're going to have to reprint it anyway to sign it.
Okay, yep. Okay, so we are up to some appointments. So the first is to the Montpelier Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Seems apropos, actually, right after the climate resolution. So for that, we had one vacant seat and one applicant from Peter Lux, who I do not see here, unless I'm missing Peter. Don't see Peter, but he also comes to the Energy Committee. Jack?
I move that we appoint Peter Lux to the MTIC.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Great, thank you, Peter. All right, and we have an appointment to the Americans with Disabilities Commission. Group that.
Conservation.
Oh, I'm skipping stuff. It's not good. Okay. This page is not loading for me right now. So how many seats do we have?
There's one vacant seat, which is Paige's, and she's and two alternates, and 3 people have applied.
There are also 2 vacancies
seats, right?
Oh.
Two vacant seats.
There are 2 vacant seats, plus my term is up.
Okay, then I'm not
Yeah,
reading.
but
So-
I think the 2 vacant seats are alternates, is that right?
I don't think so.
So I'd actually like to pause on this and actually do the ADA appointment first, because it's a little simpler, because I
Sure.
think there's multiple people for this, and we actually have to make some decisions.
Oh, okay.
About that, because of do we put someone in an alternate seat or vacant, the regular appointment? So, so going to the ADA committee, there was one vacancy and there was one applicant, Priscilla Fox. Is Priscilla here? Hello. If you wouldn't mind coming up and introducing yourself and telling us about your interest in the ADA committee.
Thank you. I'm Priscilla Fox. I live in Montpelier, and I would like to volunteer for the city in some capacity, and I think this is the best fit for me. I am a lawyer. I've had some experience with the ADA in my previous work.
Great.
So
Any
that's basically
questions?
my reason.
Great. Any questions for Priscilla?
No, I'll just note, it says that you actually lectured on a unit of the Rehabilitation Act, the predecessor to the ADA
Yes.
as well, so I understand you're intimately familiar with both the ADA and its origins.
Well, I don't know if I would say intimately familiar anymore. But I did, yes, I taught that at Vermont Law School many years ago.
Okay.
It is. Oh,
I did
yes,
not
go
take
ahead.
advantage of
Yeah.
that.
Just one question. I'm on the ADA committee, and I should just mention that this is a committee that typically meets during the business day. So
Yes.
if that's not a problem.
No,
just-
that's not a problem
Okay,
for
great.
me.
Okay, great.
I'll make
yeah,
a
Don.
motion that we appoint Priscilla Fox to the ADA committee.
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so jumping back to the Conservation Commission, so I think there were actually 4 vacancies, and because Roy Schiff was not renewing, and then there were already 2 alternate vacant seats, and then pages. Sorry?
You appointed Steve Cease last year, but he never showed up to a meeting and has not filled that position.
Well, that's
Is also empty.
interesting, because his
Doesn't expire.
appointment isn't expired yet, but if he's not coming to the meetings. Okay.
Notified him that.
Yeah. Well, let's follow up about that.
We should get an official communication from the
Yeah.
commission to us about that, so we can take an action on that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have notified.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll circle back to that one. But thank you. Okay, so there were 4 seats and 3 folks to appoint. Paige, you want to come introduce yourself? And
I'm Paige Girton, and I would like to ask that you reappoint me to the Conservation Commission. And I just found out today that we received the second grant that we applied for to do a walking tour of Vermont Green Infrastructure and finish the credit union sign. So I got to be around to finish that up.
great, super.
So you don't quit when it's done.
Right. Any questions for Paige? Okay, great. And then Joseph Whalen. If you wouldn't mind coming up, introducing yourself, and tell us about your interest in the Conservation Commission.
I thought I would do my part for the city of Montpelier by trying to help us keep this place green. I've got some background in environmental subjects. I have a degree from Lyndon State, Natural Sciences. I think I should be able to recognize a few plants and insects and trees around town and help to preserve them. I did serve on the city council, a commission some years ago in recreation. And I found it a pretty fulfilling experience, and I hope that this will be as fulfilling.
Jack.
It might not have been clear that that there was multiple full membership slots on the commission when you applied. So are you willing to be either an alternate or a full member? Depending on what we decide to do.
I think I'd prefer starting as an alternate.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, great, thanks.
Joe was also active in the group that attempted to keep recreation out of Berlin Pond.
Berlin Pond group, he was very active.
Great. All right, and Stephanie Hunt. Stephanie here. Okay, so this is one we probably should go into executive session on, yeah.
I move that we enter into executive session to discuss the appointment of a public officer or employee pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313A3.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we will be right back. Okay. All right, is there a motion to come out of executive session?
So moved. Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
I move that we appoint Paige Girton and Stephanie Hunt to permanent positions on the Conservation Commission, and Joseph Whalen to a position as alternate.
Second.
And just to clarify, by permanent position, you mean the 3-year term?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
You don't get to resign.
But not the alternate.
Commissioner for life.
Yes.
Okay.
Some of us have been on those commissions that seem to be in perpetuity.
Okay. Okay. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you, Paige and Joseph and Stephanie, for your commitment, your service. Okay, and so we have one appointment to make to the Development Review Board, and it says there's one vacancy, but it looks like there might be more. Regardless, we have one applicant. I don't know if Roger Krantz is here.
I don't see
I don't see him.
Couldn't make it.
Okay. All right, is there any,
I'll move to appoint Roger Krantz to the Development Review Board for the open 3-year term.
Second.
I was
Donna?
going to second it. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. Apologize.
So you're seconding?
Second.
Yeah, okay, just to clarify. All right, further discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, great, thank you. And thanks to Roger. Okay, so I think we are up to the presentation of the downtown master plan. So I know there's some folks here who have a presentation for us. And just to clarify, we're not voting on anything about this tonight. This is just an
No, and
update.
I think Mike can tee this up
Is that
as well as I can. But yes, that is correct. This is an introduction of kind of a status update. They'll be back in March with an actual plan recommendation. But
Do we need the lights off? Are you gonna-
Yes. Actually,
do
it
you-
shows up pretty good once we, does it?
Do you want a minute to set things up, or do you, is it,
Okay, need a minute, we can.
what time is
You
it?
guys
It's
sure
only
tech is
7:30.
working and all that.
My goodness.
It's loaded.
Well, I'm gonna, let's just keep rolling. It's only been an hour, so. I know. It's crushing right now.
Might need to adjust the lights. Is it usually bright enough?
At least this side, the one furthest.
So I'm Mike Miller, the Planning Director, and so I just wanted to go and I'm quickly just going to tee this up for these folks for look at that.
Oh, I
Like he knows what he's doing. I was in the AV club in high school. So as everyone's aware, we've been working on the downtown streetscape plan for a number of months now, and SE Group has been doing a great job at putting these ideas together and doing a lot of public input. And they've got a quick presentation. There's no decision to be made tonight. This is really taking everything that was learned and compiling a recommendation for you to start to think about and consider, and then kind of hear from you what path you want to take. We understand with an election coming up in a couple of weeks, we're going to have maybe some new faces on the council, so we didn't want to try to rush in and get a decision before then, but we wanted to get you guys the opportunity for you to comment. For anyone who's not going to be here next month, you'll have an opportunity to give us your thoughts of what you see, and for anyone who's new coming on, they'll have the same opportunity. So we'll give them a couple minutes here, maybe 15 minutes to go through an explanation of what they've come up with, and we'll just take some comments and any public input as well.
So, by way of introduction, I'm Mark Kane, Director of Community Planning and Design for SE Group, and I'm joined today by Patrick Olstad, our Project Manager and Senior Landscape Architect. The presentation today is going to kind of cover some of the high points of the draft master plan document that I believe this council has received. And I'll start off by talking about the fact that this downtown master plan is actually a core master plan. The study area that's depicted in that sort of light tan color is a subset of the actual urban fabric of Montpelier. And that's an important consideration as we get into some of the recommendations, because as you will see, there are recommendations in this plan related to land use and stormwater and some other things, and they are constrained by the study area, but we recognize the city's pursuing broader strategies elsewhere. So the study area encompasses, the main streets the study area encompasses are State Street, Main Street, Berry Street, and Langdon Street. with a touch of elm on Court Street on the sides. Patrick, why don't you walk them through the sort of the structure of the plan in terms of the streets we looked at?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I might want to do is kind of talk about sort of the high-level stuff that we looked at. We looked at the whole downtown core, pretty high level in terms of opportunities. So you just, yeah, we can go back to that. Go advance too. So in terms of our analysis, looking at the opportunities in the downtown core, one of the key things that was important was looking at the kind of bike ped connectivity and opportunities. So we were really kind of building off some of the previous studies as a starting point for our work, and then looking at other opportunities to kind of improve the connectivity, take advantage of the amazing bike path that's in there now, and really try to make it easier for folks to get there from a number of different locations, whether on bike or walking. So this is one plan that we did that kind of summarized that high level, looking at potentially closing some alleys, making things a little more pedestrian friendly, safer for people on bikes. Also investing in more infrastructure to kind of intercept people who are coming into the downtown on their bikes so they can park and then walk, because it's an incredibly walkable downtown, and just wanted to make sure that that was shown at those key locations. The next plan, we also looked at infill opportunities. We also looked at open space opportunities, and in some cases, we looked at some of the parcels where we might suggest it could be one or the other. One of the issues that we've heard is that there's a need for housing downtown. There's also the parking issue, clearly. So we looked at some of those opportunities, whether it be kind of an underutilized lot or maybe a parking lot that could have a higher and better use at some point. Really, there's pretty limited real estate, but we wanted to just kind of see what could be done in the downtown core to address some of these infill opportunities. Let's see, and I should point out that all of these studies do kind of make the assumption that the proposed parking garage hotel development is going to happen, and that's just kind of reflected in our plans as sort of a basis for our planning. So this looks at open space. I think this ties into some of the discussion heard earlier tonight. Trying to restore a riparian buffer for the river. Montpelier is similar to many other urban downtown environments where development goes right up to the river's edge. Ideally, you'd have a little bit more of a natural kind of edge there that would provide habitat. It's going to provide more stormwater kind of treatment opportunities, and also provides an open space recreational environment for people. Yeah, thank you. Microphone.
One thing that I think is really important to recognize in the community engagement was that in the core we're dealing with here, there actually is a lack of civic open space. You obviously have the little plaza out here in front of City Hall, but there's really not a lot. So one of the opportunities that exist is to take advantage of maybe some of this riparian restoration and some of those underdeveloped properties, and actually expand open space with a civic mindedness to it. And we think that might be a very interesting opportunity to explore.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that's one of the things where if you can find that alignment of achieving multiple goals, whether it be improved stormwater quality or water quality, civic open space, and habitat and things like that, that's really those opportunities where we wanted to look at. So related to that is the stormwater. So this shows again that riparian corridor. We also looked at, this is again, should tee it up. We had with our team, Watershed Consulting, who really specializes in stormwater management, and they looked at the stormwater, improved water quality opportunities through a number of different recommendations. And so this kind of tries to capture some of those possibilities, kind of a high level way. But I think one of the key things to understand in Montpelier is that infiltration is kind of limited in terms of an opportunity due to the soils. You have heavier soils here that don't drain as quickly as maybe you would like to make infiltration a major practice for stormwater. So we would be looking at some opportunities for that, but a lot of it would be looking at capturing water, getting into subsurface detention, and then filtration. And some of these practices could be very much integrated into the streetscape recommendations we're making in terms of tree plantings, where you could have those planters serve as filtration to remove phosphorus.
And just another point on that I think is really important is the fact that, again, this strategies that we're talking about are related to this study area in this core. Obviously, there are other strategies that would be applicable elsewhere in the city, and obviously, what the hope is that the recommendations from the plan and the modeling that was actually done associated with this plan would be informative to the city as it looks at its stormwater management and treatment more broadly.
So this is where we get into more specifics on the streetscape itself. And what we did was, we went through this public process. We had a couple farmers market events. We had an online survey. And we wanted to try to get a sense of what people's priorities are for the streetscape, because you only have so much area to deal with. Is it going to go to cars? Is it going to go to parking? Is it going to be for green infrastructure and trees? Is it pedestrian space? Are there, kind of opportunities for outdoor dining and seating? And so there's all these kind of competing interests, and we wanted to see how we could bring those together and find kind of the ideal balance. And the way we explored this was through two, kind of distinct concepts, Concept A and Concept B. I think, and let me just first say that both of them are trying to find, make improvements to the pedestrian environment in the downtown, improve the bikeability to the downtown, get more trees in the downtown environment. So I think as a baseline, we wanted to do all of that. And then we just kind of shifted the priority a little bit to one or more of these focuses on each of the concepts. So with Concept A, I'd say this one, the kind of biggest focus for this is on placemaking. Really trying to maybe go a little bit beyond the kind of typical business as usual, creating some really special places through enhancing the streetscape, and in some cases kind of blurring the line between the street and the sidewalk. Maybe looking at options of kind of having a flush condition where you'd bring that kind of enhanced pavement across the sidewalk into the road. This is in front of City Hall here, where we're looking at kind of maybe an enhanced plaza space that could be opened up a little bit, become a more important and kind of functional civic space, and then that could then kind of carry through the street to really give that building, the importance of what happens to that building, sort of a grander sort of feel in front of it. And then as a general sort of concept in the streetscape, we really wanted to emphasize creating an environment that would be good for growing really large, healthy trees. And having those trees have enough space to grow with bigger planters, and having them a little further from the street. Let's see, go to the next one. You can see how this played out in State Street. Again, the idea of kind of creating this enhanced pavement that could carry across the street at the Rialto Bridge, and that's up for reconstruction, as you know. So that's an exciting opportunity to do something kind of special there. And this is looking at the idea of like maybe you could do some kind of shade structure, get more seating out there, and really draw attention to that kind of important interface between the streetscape and the river that's right there. And you can see one of those larger tree beds in the foreground of that perspective sketch, and that gives you an opportunity to do some understory kind of colorful plantings to kind of bring more vibrancy to the street. Langdon Street, for option A, we explored some, kind of interesting ideas of blurring the line between the street and the sidewalk. Looked at here at flush curb throughout the whole street. It has, it's, I think, a distinct kind of character as it is, Langdon Street, compared to the rest of the downtown, based on the kind of the scale and kind of width of the street. So we were kind of proposing here the idea of some kind of special pavement surfacing that could span across the entire corridor. Maybe some, eliminating one row of parking on the north side of the street to free up more sidewalk space, because it's pretty tight through there. And then the idea here is that you could close the street and use it for festivals and special events, and it could just have its own kind of special character. And we didn't, carry that level of detail through every foot of the downtown core, but wanted to kind of capture the overall concept and what it would mean in terms of parking or parking loss. So this is kind of a diagram that captures all of that in terms of what the street tree kind of strategy is and what the parking strategy would be. So You see some areas where we are indicating a loss of parking, some areas where it would remain to be parallel parking, and then some cases where you might be able to add some parking back in through angled parking.
So the big idea with A essentially is to introduce, maybe less numbers of trees, but more space, more volume for trees. And the idea that was mentioned earlier in discussion about some climate strategies, that soil volume may become more valuable for carbon retention, so sequestration, for example. It also may allow us to pick trees that actually have a bigger canopy. And one of the challenges right now in many urban environments is having very shallow, narrow bands in which to plant trees, and that limits greatly the species composition you could use. So the idea, that's one of the big ideas that A. The other big idea, as you saw, was this idea of blurring the lines between the pedestrian space and the vehicular space. This idea of tabling some of the streets to allow for more flow of people. And that may be a very good long-term strategy for the city, because that is a situation where as the needs for cars changes, as the needs for transit changes, as the city comes to terms with a new future in terms of mobility, it can claim more of that space for pedestrians in a more adaptive way. When you have hard curb lines, that's a much more challenging situation. So there's a lot of value potentially in looking at curbless streets in select areas, as we're recommending, to allow you to adapt as the world around us changes.
So in terms of concept B, again, some of the same overall kind of high-level priorities, getting more trees on there, improving the pedestrian experience. I think one of the key distinctive factors or elements of this plan is the idea of incorporating grade-separated bike lanes on Main Street, and so that's what came out of that Barry and Main scoping study. We pretty much followed that as a guideline for this concept. And so when we were developing these concepts, just going back to concept A, we realized that sort of, that is an opportunity cost in terms of the pedestrian and tree environment to put in that dedicated bike infrastructure on Main Street. And so in A, we did look at, what if we just kept bikes on the road on Main Street with just sharrows and maybe some traffic calming, and then looked at some locations off of Main to provide that important north-south circulation to get to the bike path and create that larger connectivity beyond the downtown core. And so with A, we would look at the option of Elm Street really serving that function with a cycle track, and then having connectivity crossing State Street past the the proposed parking garage and making its way down to the bike path from there. So, but we wanted to look at what this looked like in terms of character and how that would feel to have the dedicated bike lanes. There's also, I think in general, just because we are giving a little more room to the bike lanes, and in this case, maintaining more on-street parking, this is a view of State Street, it meant that we have less space for the trees, and so we're looking at tree grates in option B throughout the area, just because they take up, kind of less, they impact the sidewalk less and allow you to kind of walk right across the surface of them. So for concept B, for Langdon Street, we did not carry that special pavement across the street, but we did in this one create a wider sidewalk for the north side, and we're able to achieve that again by eliminating a row of parking. So again, this one's a little less outside the box. And then we captured all that, what it meant in terms of parking on concept B. And it's interesting because even though we had more of an emphasis on maintaining on-street parking in concept B, it actually ended up working out fairly even because we were able to have a little more angled parking on the north stretch of Main Street with concept A. So in terms of our recommendations, I'll put this one back to Mark. This is talking about kind of land use strategy.
Yeah, so, as we've mentioned, I think the land use opportunity that exists is to sort of reclaim the riparian zone, and this is something that's already codified within the city regulations. It's already there. I think the commitment will be in executing on it ultimately, and also prioritizing it in terms of its strategy. But the couple key things that we sort of thought would be relevant to this conversation would be, making sure that there's a wider green corridor for sure. Making sure that we have adequate parking, and if that parking is at the rear of some of those buildings, which it is today, largely, making sure there's ways to get to it. And that's really critical. And I think there's some unutilized, underutilized lots on Main Street, for example, that provide some connectivity to the Jacobs lot behind. Maintaining some level of connectivity to those areas is going to be critical if they redevelop, if there's an infill opportunity there. But the real big sort of major objective here is to connect the river to the people. Make sure that the civic space, the public realm, the streetscape is actually in some meaningful way connected back to the river, because that appreciation for the river, the understanding of that the river is an important part of the community, that openness to it, the visibility of it, provides a more direct connection between people and that environmental resource. And we feel like that would be a great opportunity to make sure people don't realize it's just not out of sight, out of mind. It's actually integrated within the city.
Yes, in analyzing Concept A and Concept B, we went through this kind of methodical approach to tracking what we really thought were the important goals. And so we developed these evaluation criteria and then rated them. And basically, it looked like Concept A in most ways was coming out on top. There's some that were similar. Maybe one construction cost was maybe a little bit more favorable for option B. But this was an important way to make sure we were really just being objective about it, and we have more detail in the report that talks about each of these particular criteria and why it got that rating. So in terms of our final recommendations, in general, option A is what we're recommending. We've got more support from the public for that option, and it's really has a kind of more elevated placemaking component to it. We did ultimately recommend a bit of a hybrid in that there is a kind of a chunk of option B that we thought might make sense, and that's on State Street between the Rialto Bridge and Main Street, where you could create an improved pedestrian environment. You've got enough area to work with to kind of narrow the current roadway and maintain on-street parking. So they're sort of trying to factor in a balance of competing interests, and wanting the business owners to have comfort in the amount of kind of convenient parking, but also making sure we're addressing the needs to improve the pedestrian environment and create more real meaningful green space as well. We are kind of maintaining this recommendation of really enhanced and special treatment for the Rialto Bridge. And I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what it was. Yeah, I think that kind of encapsulates. Oh, I know what it was. I think in terms of Mark mentioned flexibility, as the need for parking here might lessen over time, you do still have the opportunity to continue with the use of these parklets. And I think that's a really creative and flexible way to capture some of that street space and make it usable for outdoor dining and seating, things like that. We did also just kind of make some basic recommendations in terms of the materials and furnishings. This is mainly kind of giving a sense of what we think the character of that should be, given this is a historic downtown, but also some discussion of kind of durability of these different materials and some of the environmental benefits you'd have from things like permeable pavers. So this just kind of is a little snapshot of what we think is kind of the vision for that kind of look and feel as you get to more of that detailed level. And this captures the hybrid approach to the overall streetscape in terms of the tree treatment and parking.
So on balance, there's relatively little loss.
Could you use the microphone, please?
On balance, there's relatively little loss overall of parking, with the presumption that the parking garage is constructed and that the streetscape can benefit from some access to spaces in that parking garage.
We also discuss a number of other potential strategies to help with the parking situation, and those are all outlined in there. And a lot of that's drawn upon a previous parking study that was done. We also have Stantec Consulting on our team, and they're traffic engineers and civil engineers, and they've provided their guidance for that, as well as all of our vehicular and bike ped kind of recommendations. We've had just this very multidisciplinary approach to this project. And going back to the Elm Street, one other thing on that is to make that cycle track concept work, you need to go to one-way traffic for that block. That would be proposed as heading south. And then to address some of the issues with traffic safety and pedestrian safety at that intersection, there'd be a no left turn from Elm Street onto State Street. Mark, do you want to speak to the implementation?
Yeah, I mean, as is customary with a project like this, there's some consideration of how would you go about doing it. And we tried to break these different street segments down into some smaller bits, because quite frankly, you're going to want to do that to maintain the functionality of the streets and the interim and businesses and all of that. There are obviously costs associated with all of these things, but I think, and there's process ahead. I think the really important detailed design work would come as each one of these segments is moved forward. But I think a couple of key things that I think are really important that the implementation matrix sort of discusses is that the expectation is that some of the stormwater strategies that are articulated in the plan would be done commensurate with some of these streetscape improvements. So that again, you're building this system of solutions that deal with the placemaking elements, the pedestrian elements, the bike elements, and the stormwater management elements. So that's really critical. The other thing is that, and we've spoken with Public Works throughout this project, is that there's also, as was mentioned earlier, obviously existing infrastructure issues that the city's dealing with, and it would be advisable to consider what those projects are and aligning them with particular streetscape improvements, so that you're taking advantage of the disruption and the mobilization associated with that. And then the other thing I think that's really important is to sort of stress is that for any of these projects, most of these projects, there is going to have to be a public-private interaction. Obviously, some of those open spaces that were identified as potential options are open spaces that may exist or partially exist on private land. And it's clearly not the city's ability to just do what they want with that, but to work in a partnership with those private landowners with a strategic vision to help guide those interactions. And then that's what we see this as sort of helping to do. The good news is, I think obviously the city's already explored this to some degree with the scoping study, previous scoping study, is that there's a lot of this that probably can be done in the relatively near term. Obviously with caveats and the logistics associated with that. But a lot of what we're talking about, the scale of this downtown, as Patrick said, is really walkable. So you have the benefit of not being overly large. So, a small improvement on State Street, for example, would make a very disproportionate impact on the character of your downtown. So that's actually a very positive thing. The other thing I would just sort of acknowledge just to kind of summarize the report a little bit more, there's a significant, one of the things that we pitched to the city when we proposed on this project was this modeling exercise that Watershed did to understand the water quality benefits of potentially some of these options. And as you'll see in the study, there are obviously some similarities. There's pretty close alignment in some of those options in terms of the water quality improvements, but we think it provides an interesting model for the city to consider as it's refining these opportunities in the future to kind of go back to that modeling and say, okay, how is it evolving? Are we actually achieving some of these objectives that the modeling suggests we can achieve in terms of phosphorus reduction, for example, or the retention of stormwater? So there's some really good things. I think that as a strategic document, it puts into place things that you can use in the city's plan update, for example, or as you have your continued conversations around stormwater, or as I was mentioning to Michael earlier, in some ways this fills the donut hole that your Complete Streets guide, which didn't really cover this part of the city, does. It provides a little bit of a more clarity as to maybe what the direction could be.
And with that, we conclude our formal remarks.
Yeah, you guys get it. Thanks.
So I think this is really an opportunity for us and the public to just check in, see if we're headed in the right direction, what feedback do we have at this point. So comments from council. I have a lot of comments. Yes.
First off, I thought that was excellent. Thanks so much. It was very easy to digest, and I think we have a lot to look forward to if some of this is implemented. Not to be the doomsday guy, but if the garage is not built, is my math correct that this plan would anticipate between 31 and 47 less parking spots downtown than we have currently?
That's probably about right.
Okay.
Hybrid plan is a little bit less than that.
Okay.
You gotta be right on the number.
Yeah.
So we can't, sorry.
Okay, so I have lots of thoughts here. Okay. So this feels to me like a good start. There are questions that I am hoping that this plan will answer for us that I don't feel like there's good. I just want to make sure that you're aware that these are some of the expectations that I have for this. One is I think we need specific guidance on what do we do with the TKS property, right? What is the need there? Is it for office space or is it for more green space? And if the recommendation is like that, yes, that should be included in the riparian buffer. Great, but just be really clear about that space because we have to make a decision. So that's one thing. I'm doing this in no particular order. By the way, I think it was a little weird the way the document was attached or uploaded somehow because the appendices were at the beginning, and so that was.
Read that first?
Yes, so read all the appendices first. And actually, to that point, if you're going to include those appendices, there are a whole bunch of graphs in there that are bar graphs that have no labels, and I don't know what they mean. So, yeah, it was, what to do about Langdon Street and Main Street, and there were X and Y axes that had no labels, and I was like, what is happening? So that's a not terribly substantive point. For Langdon Street, I sort of half expected there to be at least the consideration of what if it was just a walking plaza? What if it was closed to cars? I mean, Church Street is closed to cars, but cars still go on it to make deliveries and stuff, which would understandably be necessary.
Can I talk to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so, the idea, as Patrick was describing, the Festival Street idea.
Yeah.
Can you go out and use the microphone thing?
That's not working, sorry. As Patrick was describing, in concept A, the idea, and B to some degree, but A certainly, the idea of turning it into more of a festival street, getting rid of curbs, making it feel more pedestrian, that is the recommendation for Langdon Street. Whether the city wants to permanently close that, the design wouldn't necessarily need to change. Our office is actually on Church Street. We did the Church Street Marketplace project.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So quite familiar with the rankling that went across at the Rusty Scuffer next door. But the idea is that it would still have to provide access. There's going to be access for service. There's going to be access for fire. There's going to be access for public works. There's going to need to maintain some vehicular access to Langdon Street. So removable bollards, for example, are an easy design fix that would allow the city to manage and control the flow of vehicles within Langdon Street. And it would fit the design really well.
So it would make sense to me then, if it's okay with you, if you could address that specifically in the report, even if it's to say that that is a policy decision that we are not recommending, but this structure allows for that possibility. Sure. That would be helpful, just because this is a conversation that has been going on for a long time, and so for it to be specifically addressed, I think would be valuable.
So I think there's also a little bit of a conversation.
Can you also, or can people hear? Okay.
Oh, so this one isn't working?
I don't know, say a little more.
All right, this one working?
Just
just
that one, yeah.
All right, well, that explains it. All right, so the other consideration that SE Group was given when we started this process was that we weren't proposing to reduce the amount of parking downtown. So if we had a decision that said we're going to take all the on-street parking off, then we would have to come up with a proposal that would go and say, but we're going to build another parking structure over here to replace that parking, just as a part of the policy of what they're working at. So part of removing the rest of the cars on Langdon Street would then put us in a position where we're going to be deficient in parking and have to replace it somewhere else. So it could certainly be accommodated in another way, but that was just part of the conversation. So sometimes removing everything, in an ideal world, you might be able to come in and pull it all off, but where does somebody who wants to go to Buchspieler park if there's no parking?
And that could also get at the same point that you all are making about, like, this isn't a policy document necessarily, it's about structure and
right, and
design,
I think it's a design, solution that's policy ready. If you decide to do what you want to do in terms of closing off Langdon Street, the design is malleable enough to address that.
Okay.
Yeah, one other thing on that. I mean, I think we did talk about it with Stantec while we were out there, and I guess one concern is it's not just the on-street parking, there's also parking areas for the businesses there, so it has kind of a bigger impact as well. But I think we love pedestrian-only streets, so if it could happen, that'd be great. But, yeah.
And I assume it pertains to this, yes.
Dan Groberg from Montpelier Live. I'll just add that one advantage of the really flexible streetscape design is that it allows for seasonal changes. So we may consider Langdon Street being pedestrian only in the summer when we have a lot of pedestrians out and about, but in the winter have more proximate parking when it's cold and people don't want to walk as far. And that streetscape design allows for that kind of flexibility. So I think that's really an exciting option.
Cool. Thank you. I agree. And Elizabeth, did you have something you want to add on this particular point, or? Okay. I'm going to keep going with my, did you have something to add on this particular point? Yes. Okay.
So, my name is David Papierski. Hello, everyone. The weather is very different in the winter compared to the summer. And I realize this is kind of based on the future parking garage. And in a way, Montpelier is already there with the farmers market. State Street is already closed down. So the idea is after everyone goes home from the State House Monday through Friday, there's going to be empty parking garage so people can park there, close down the city, and it'll be more pedestrian and bike friendly. But that, once again, is dependent upon change in weather. And I think it's great that these three gentlemen were discussing about environmental concerns and the river, as we were just discussing before this climate declaration. So I think we should also keep that in mind when we're planning what the future downtown area of Montpelier is going to be. And cars are always a problem, but then if you close down the city streets, then there's always public transportation from Department of Employment and or Unemployment Department, whatever it's called, shuttle people back and forth to the downtown area. So,
thank you. And it's on this particular topic?
Yeah,
yes.
On the specific,
yeah.
Hi, Gene Leon, District 3. On the Langdon Street study, was there a consideration on the dance studio that's there? So if you close, I like the proposal of removing one of the parking lanes, but there's a lot of parents throughout the year that just drop off their kids, come and go, and I'm one of those parents. Every Friday, and there's a lot of kids in these classes. So we're not necessarily looking to park, we're just, just drop off, pick up. And that, I've noticed at various times, that happens a lot on Langdon Street, so it'd be tough to just close it off.
Yeah, I mean, that we did.
And then remove, so, yeah.
Mason.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I mean, we did in both schemes maintain parking on one side of the street. And I think as a general recommendation, if we are losing on-street parking, the idea of having more kind of pull-off spaces for temporary parking, if you need to do a quick run into a store or something, I think is a great idea. So we do appreciate that sentiment, yeah.
So my next thing might have been addressed, because if this is not really addressing policy, I mean, something that we've talked about for a really long time, and it might be yet another long time before we do it, is thinking about reverse angle parking. And I mean, just as we brought up angled parking here, I don't know if that's, I assume that's sort of outside of the scope of the things that you would recommend or not,
Well,
but.
no, I mean, it's not. I mean, we did talk about that for that upper stretch of Main Street, where it looked like you could maintain angled parking for a lot of it, especially with, if you didn't have the dedicated bike lanes.
Mhm.
So reverse angled parking is something that we've considered. I mean, I think there's, some concern that it's just a little bit confusing. That's the challenge of it, right? It's definitely safer, but there's a little bit of a learning curve to it. So I think we would keep that, as a possibility, sure.
Okay. Well, and again, if that affects the structure and the angles of anything, I suppose.
Well, wait,
yeah, go ahead.
But reverse angle park, I mean, have there been studies about how that works in winter?
There have been studies about its effectiveness in winter. It's the safety issue, as Patrick mentioned.
Right.
I mean, it technically is safer. And I don't, from a structural perspective, from a design perspective, what's being shown can accommodate that, if that's the policy decision. It's a striping thing. It's not a big issue. I think the question would be, and it's kind of a broader question, maintenance in general. If you're not maintaining your parking spaces, then it's a problem.
Right. It just, I mean, I've done the reverse angle parking, and looking at the normal angle parking and the difficulty we have in winter in demarcating the spaces and getting people to park, I could see.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if other
We have an office in
communities.
Colorado and Denver. We go to Denver all the time, and there's a lot of reverse angle parking in Denver. And when they have their periodic snowstorms, it's a challenge for sure.
Well, perhaps a future conversation. So you mentioned the possibility of having permeable pavers. I'm very interested in that. I'm also, I feel conflicted about it because I both dearly want them to work, and I also am skeptical about their efficacy or their durability in this climate.
Yeah.
And so I've always kind of wondered, like, okay, so I know that there are places in Europe that do this, and they have freeze-thaw cycles, and what are they doing? And so I don't know if you have specific recommendations about that, but does it matter, like, what's underneath them? What can you say about that?
Yeah. Well, I guess first of all, I would just say that it's becoming more mainstream, and we've worked now on a couple projects that include it. Downtown in South Burlington, in the new city center, that has a band of permeable pavers, and those are clay brick pavers that are very durable and resistant to salt damage. And basically, you just have a very deep crushed aggregate base supporting the bricks. They have little nubs that kind of keep that space between them and allows that water to go through. So, I think we feel confident that it's a reliable method. There is a little bit of maintenance that you have to periodically kind of clear out the joints and make sure that it's flowing. But I think there's other permeable paver applications that have been less reliable, like permeable concrete, for example, which is a poured-in-place concrete that has larger pores that allows the water to go through, and that has been susceptible to lots of spalling from salts and is not as reliable. But the pavers, in particular, clay brick pavers, I think are solid.
With the necessity to clean them out, it would be, not for right now, but it'd be good to include any information about what kind of time commitment that would be, so that we have an understanding of the ongoing sort of maintenance of that. So we can be planning for that.
You can add that, yep.
And then I just want to point out, I mean, I am psyched to see the riparian buffer in there, recognizing that that's mostly on private property.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that I'm clear about this point, that if we ended up adopting a plan that had a riparian buffer as proposed, that as itself would not constitute a taking, but if it were adopted into the city plan, that it might. Is that, what can you tell me about what would constitute a taking in that situation?
Only if it gets into the zoning where there's a certain requirement. And you can still do it without it being a taking. It just has to be, the riparian buffer will not be the taking. It's the public access that becomes the taking. Now, because something like, say, the Jacobs lot is already public, then it's just a matter of, I think, negotiating the details that are within that lease agreement that says you have to maintain a certain number of parking spaces. But Bill knows that agreement much better than I do.
Okay. So if it makes it into the zoning, and if it restricts public access?
If it requires public access, we cannot give public access to private property without just compensation.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Sorry, maybe those, well, anyway. There's a lot of questions.
No, they're good
Thank
questions.
you. Glenn?
Just a thing or two. This is great, and I love it in general. I wanted to highlight one thing that I liked in particular from one of the very first slides, the pedestrian opportunities. The north-south access between streets that are not currently easily connected by pedestrian routes. Like Diane, who was talking earlier about the climate emergency declaration, I am car-free, and I walk all over town all the time, and those little green paths on the right side of Main Street make me very happy to think about, and I'm looking forward to something like that.
Just if I can make a point about that, when we did our initial walk around right here in the Blanchard lot, that was kind of one of the first ideas that kind of popped out, because it clearly is a remnant grid that has been lost. And I think that going back to the sort of the overarching strategy that's sort of exemplified by this opportunities plan, it's sort of reconstructing the grid a little bit, but with a de-emphasis on cars and an emphasis on pedestrians. And I think that's a really kind of it could be a very innovative strategy for the city, because that north-south connectivity is one of the biggest sort of drawbacks. And having some mid-block, pedestrian accessibility opens up, other routes for people to get in and out. Back to the bike strategy, it's another way of capturing people on intercepting them on the periphery of this core to park and walk in their downtown environment, so that they're comfortable and their bike's in a safe spot and they can get where they need to go. And it also provides, hopefully, as the infill opportunities happen, like with the Court Street property, if that ever builds into a parking garage, for example, or something else, that pedestrian connectivity being established would enable it to function more integratedly into the downtown core.
I apologize, I have two more. But Jack, you can go before me.
I think there's a lot to like here. I'm kind of with Ann, on the pavers, and kind of skeptical about that. My father-in-law spent his whole professional life as a municipal engineer doing roads and stuff, and he was up visiting one time, and we saw the pavers in front of City Center building, and his reaction was, "Yep, architects really love pavers, engineers hate them because."
So I guess landscape architects are agnostic.
Because, they screw up the plows and they do all this stuff. And so I just need to be convinced about that, probably. Do you want to respond to that right now?
Well, no, I think, I understand your concerns. I would recommend talking to South Burlington and Burlington, because Burlington just put in permeable pavers on St. Paul Street, too. That's kind of the first phase of their Great Streets project that includes a lot of stormwater, kind of innovative stormwater management integrated into the streetscape, permeable pavers, and they're using concrete pavers. South Burlington is using clay brick pavers. So I would recommend, it's newly installed, so see how it does over time, but I think it'd be worth talking to them and seeing what their experience is.
Thanks. I'm a bit concerned about, and I probably need to be convinced and concerned about the safety of the zero curb concept, because, I just picture, a curb is one of the things that really tells pedestrians that they're on the sidewalk or they're on the street. And we already have some issues with people heedlessly stepping into the street or being, getting hit by cars.
Right. Few things on that. I mean, I think for all those areas where we're proposing that, you would have a detectable warning strip that identifies the edge of the pedestrian zone. So if anyone's visually impaired, they would know that they're then crossing into the street. I think it's, even for non-visually impaired people, would be a visual kind of marker of that edge. We also are showing bollards in a lot of those locations. That would be another visual kind of marker for that. I think in terms of nighttime, you'd want to make sure you have really good lighting in those locations. So I think a lot of those concerns can be addressed through the design.
And one of the other aspects of the concept day was the raised planters. So one of the benefits of actually having those raised planters there is they actually create some of that edge as well. So as opposed to graded trees.
And then one last thing that I want to, were you going to follow up on what I'm saying?
Only
Glenn?
just to that thing about the curbless, yeah, if I could, because again, and this is going to be just anecdotal, but as a pedestrian, the curbless streets tend to feel safer to me in a certain way, because they tend to be limited, they tend to be short, and it's always been very well visually signaled so that drivers and pedestrians understand that this is a shared space, everyone goes slowly. I think the other thing that occurs to me is that in a lot of the dangerous behavior I see of pedestrians crossing feels like it's crossing at odd spots where there are not crosswalks. I think funneling more of that activity into places like this that are curbless may actually end up being safer. Speculative, but I can see that being the effect. So I really like that part of the idea as well.
And I think having, really good signage to mark that as well is important for drivers.
And then the last thing I was going to make, which is really kind of a small technical thing, and we get our council materials electronically for something like this, and it's great, and I hardly print out anything for something like this that is so graphic, heavy, visual. I think I would find it useful to have it on these full-size papers like you guys have.
Okay.
Just let us know, whoever wants them, and Kevin will print them out, and we'll get them out to you guys.
I'm going to sign up tonight?
Just put your hands up, get a count on it.
So I have a question about circulation for cars, which is that, I should say, overall, I like the changes. I mean, I'll remain agnostic on the pavers as well. But I do like the effect that they create, and I like the idea of a public plaza space that spills out and into a bigger area. But my concern is that, Main Street is a huge funnel for traffic coming from the north. There's no other way for them to get across the river. And, cars coming from East Montpelier, down Main Street, cars coming from Route 12, cars also coming in, that don't turn off onto Route 2. I mean, what is the plan to sort of make a circulation, or is it just simply that this plan accepts the traffic as it is? Because I think one of the issues, at least with the pedestrian and some of the safety issues, is that cars coming through downtown Montpelier get frustrated because it's a series of stop, even when, say like a traffic signal says green, but there's two crosswalks in front of it, and so cars get stuck, and I've seen people get very frustrated at that. Is there any plan or any idea for making the downtown really, as we make it more pedestrian friendly, perhaps giving cars alternate ways of getting across the river?
I don't think that's something that we've explored. I mean, just a couple other things in terms of the circulation on Main Street. We're kind of going with the recommendations that came out of that Barry Main scoping study, which would include a traffic light at the Barry and Main intersection, as well as a mini roundabout at the School Street Main intersection. So I don't know how much you can really do to deal with those sort of larger circulation issues, but I mean, I think having a little bit of frustration for drivers in a downtown is sort of to be expected.
True, but it's I mean, it's not someone coming into downtown and thinking, like if I turn on to downtown on Bailey and then head past the State House, I know I'm going into downtown, making a choice to do that.
Right.
As opposed to somebody coming from the north, they really have no choice but to go through
Right.
downtown, even if they really don't want to.
Right. I guess if you do route them off of that, is that putting them through a neighborhood or something? So
Right,
there's
or-
always a trade-off with that. And
I understand, but I mean, I just wonder, as we make this more pedestrian-friendly, which I support, I like the idea of that. I just, seeing on Saturday morning the amount of traffic that gets blocked on Main Street, seeing the level of frustration I think people experience when they're stuck in that traffic,
Right.
when they don't want to be, when they're not, it's one thing to go through downtown. Like, you go into Manhattan, and you're frustrated, you have no one to blame but yourself. But, if you can't avoid doing it to just get to the other place you want to get to, I think that would be a highly,
Yeah, I think the other thing, one thing that recognizes that the strategy A and B, there's some flexibility there. They're not mutually exclusive, right?
Right.
So the emphasis on pedestrianization can be achieved in different ways, depending on considerations like what you're describing.
well, and I'm thinking, I go back when I started in some of the planning work, we have the old cityscape that imagined a completely pedestrian downtown. But they also had a circulator that was essentially School Street, Court Street. I think they were going to break through the hillside on Cedar to get there. I'm not sure how they imagined that, but it was the 70s. It was a different time.
There was a bubble over Winooski.
Exactly. There was an air bridge or something. But nevertheless, I mean, I think that is the thing that I see that's missing here is that how do we deal with this? Because the traffic's only going to increase as we encourage people, as there's development to the north and communities grow. I wonder, if we don't set ourselves up for this problem that will not go away and will get worse. And so, the traffic backs up at certain times a day, and a lot of times a day, and it's going to continue to do that, and that may feed people's frustration and take away from really the enjoyment of the downtown as it is, because you have this constant flow of traffic through it.
I think, the point you're it's a policy question ultimately. And I think if you're putting a marker down through a project like this, a plan like this, that says, we as a city want this to be a more pedestrian, walkable downtown, that's one of the consequences that
Right.
you're going to, we did the St. Albans streetscape, and, that is their main street. And there's now been alternate routes discovered by the locals. I live near St. Albans.
Sure.
And that's what's happened. So there would be some transference of mobility for people who don't want to deal with that. I think but that does not mean it's not a good idea to reclaim your main street for pedestrians.
Right.
It's
I
like
don't.
what happens elsewhere.
I don't disagree. I would like to see, I guess as just one member, I would like to see some consideration to that other than simply say, well, nature will find a way.
I think we can bring up that issue and that question to Stantec, the traffic engineers in our team, and just see what they say. And I mean, my guess is they'll say it requires another larger study, but it may need that to really have a definitive answer if there are options.
Is this about this? Yeah, and then Lauren.
I think the question, the policy decision is to make a concerted effort that we really talk about not having that second car, not bringing your car downtown, increasing mobility. The microtransit is one of those choices. Rideshare car, there's lots of ways we can try to help reduce traffic downtown, but it'll take a real massive concerted effort.
I don't disagree with that.
Well, I also want to just jump in here, and I just want to make sure that you're aware that we had that Barry Main Street study, a scoping study with some traffic changes planned for that.
Right. No, I mean, I did review that as well, but
okay.
I'm really particularly, and have seen, especially from the north that comes down, and it's not the Barry. I understand we fixed the Barry, that addresses that, but, I think there is that, there are those people that's the way to get, that's the only way to get through town. So microtransit may not be the solution if you're coming from Morrisville and you want to get on the highway. That you happen to come through. And I just use that as an example. I understand there are other routes, but, East Montpelier may be a better example. But I think that's just, it's a concern, and it's something we should be thinking about, not just simply in a way of doing that policy, but how are we going to actually handle this on the streets with this additional traffic?
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
I just wanted to, it might be more of a statement, although if you had any more examples to provide, I definitely heard a lot throughout of some examples of really looking at kind of flexibility over time, because I do hope that we are moving away from a heavy reliance on single occupancy vehicles, and that, so I think the flexibility in this design I really like, where we could claim more space for pedestrians and bikes over time as we move in that direction. Just kind of curious, and it's a little bit to Dan's point from earlier of the kind of how much, it definitely seems like some thought was put into it, but how kind of cohesive is the city with the net zero goal, and our, knowing that with a changing climate and everything, we need to be developing resilient infrastructure for the new kind of climate we're going to have moving forward. And just wanted to hear a little bit more about kind of how that has been embedded. I heard a couple examples that you raised, but just how kind of synced up is this plan with helping us achieve our net zero goals, and also just the reality of a changing climate, and that it's going to be resilient over the long term, the kinds of materials and everything that we're proposing to put in.
I think a few things we could speak to. I think, talk about sustainability. I mean, one of the things of sustainability, I think, is durability and planning for, something that's going to last. So I think that's embedded in it. I think getting more green in the downtown core through trees that can actually thrive and have enough rooting volume to grow well is key to our plan. So I didn't get into the details of it, but with the permeable paving, the idea with that would be that you'd have this subsurface soil that would be supported in these, there's different ways of doing it, but there's soil cells, basically these structures below grade that can support the pavement and allow you to have good planting soil. And so we're kind of learned in the recent years that trees need a lot of volume to actually thrive. And so the old idea of just putting a pit in the ground and surrounding it with pavement and not doing anything other than that, it doesn't really work that well long term usually. So really investing in that tree infrastructure, so that can have multiple environmental benefits, from cleaning the air, uptake of pollutants through the roots, shading the pavement, shading cars, so that there's energy savings there, shading buildings, making a cooler environment for the cars and buildings. So I think those are some of the main things we're looking at, and then also just the idea of like bolstering the riparian buffer and adding stormwater storage and treatment. We're doing those things in this plan and trying to integrate it in a way that like works and works with the other kind of goals that we have. So,
based on that, Elizabeth, would you like to say anything, speak to any of that?
Yeah, just real quick. I'd like to thank Mark and Patrick for a great presentation and terrific work.
Thank you.
Glad that you brought the watershed group along, because stormwater is going to be a big part of managing the downtown. So I'd like to make 2 points to...
Before you get too far, could you identify yourself, please?
I'm sorry. Elizabeth Courtney. I live here in town on Clarendon Avenue.
Thanks.
So 2 recommendations, one substantive and one a little frivolous, but we could use a little levity, I think, at this hour of the evening. So recommendation number one is to recognize stormwater as an issue that is going to get bigger and bigger for us, and take that bull by the horns and extend our study of the effects of increased stormwater on the downtown from high points draining down into the town and from the river climbing up into the town. We've got a water issue. Could we extend the work with SE Group and Watershed Consulting, and/or make sure that the declaration of emergency has an element of the issue of stormwater in it, recognizing stormwater as something that we need to pay attention to. My frivolous point has to do with the title of this report, A Capital Idea. And I would rather see this title have something to do with the clock tower of City Hall as opposed to the state capitol dome. And you will recognize that Taylor Street is the bright line that we didn't cross in this study. And yet we have the Capitol Gold Dome pictured in the, yes, so, and if we had a clock tower, our clock tower, as the symbol for this report, we would be able to say, rather than it's a capital idea, it's an idea that we have no time to waste on because we have an emergency. And with that, I'll say good night. Thank you. You all are wonderful.
You can say timely report.
Thank you.
Well, although they did spell capital with an A, so they're talking about the city, not the building.
It's still on the other side of Taylor Street.
I do want to just note, Elizabeth, that we did add some language to the proposed resolution that actually identified Montpelier's issues with increased stormwater and snowfall, actually.
Good.
Yes. Connor, I thought I saw a hand over here.
Yeah, a quick one. Did you consider temporary bike lanes in this? I know in a previous presentation, there had been something brought up. I know personally, I bike almost every day in the town, but I'm way too much of a coward to do it in this weather, so I imagine some people might be like me. So yeah, I just want to know if that was considered. How difficult would it be to set up, if so?
And was that with the idea of just testing out bike lanes?
Or have it seasonal?
Oh, just have it seasonal. We did not explore that as an idea, no. Could kick it around, yeah. Okay, all right, yeah.
Okay, I have one more sort of big thing, sorry. This is maybe towards the, it's not exactly frivolous, but leaning that way, perhaps.
Okay.
I mean, something that has come up in other conversations that I've had with people around town. Sometimes people dream about a river walk that goes between the Rialto Bridge and Langdon Street. Okay, was that on the radar?
Well,
and if it was, and it was, like that's a bad plan, then
We yelled
that's
at.
okay.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
we
fine.
didn't explore it as a connection all the way to Langdon Street, but as an overhanging sort of seated
Yes,
area,
right.
which we were very excited about, and then was quickly understood that it's due to FEMA kind of like
Okay.
regulation. We can't. It's not doable.
Okay,
really.
well that's actually really helpful. So
Yeah.
FEMA
Yeah.
sort of prevent that. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
That helps. So
Yeah.
when that conversation comes up again, then that's what I can say.
Yeah.
So in that same sort of mindset, though, because the point of that would be to enjoy the river, right? And that
Yeah.
was one of the things that you said was the goal. And so I'll just say that something that I have always wanted is the walkway along, or the both sidewalks along the Main Street Bridge there. I mean, I always want to just stop and enjoy the river right there, and I don't know that you can really widen the bridge, and so it's probably not realistic to think of any sort of overlooks along the bridge there, but and I know this is private property, so maybe that's not really realistic to have some kind of a place to enjoy the river here, but that would be delightful.
Yeah.
And if not on the bridge, and if not in this space to watch the waterfall, is there another place that might be fun to? I mean, in some of, I know we're talking about sort of. I'm gonna orient myself here. Yeah, so roughly in that space, we're talking about having more green space.
Yeah.
Anyway, I would love to explore that as just places of delight, right? Where are the delightful places to sit and enjoy?
We certainly,
in this venue.
to answer your question directly, I think we did look at a number of potential opportunities, and a couple that I'll point out. The Rialto Bridge is an intersection point between the public realm and the river. So that's a really good opportunity. Now, we're obviously hamstrung by virtue of FEMA regulations to doing something grand, and we actually we were very excited about the opportunity.
Okay.
But that didn't avail itself. I would say where the Shaw's is, for example, as it stands today, that's very challenging. But it's not a foregone conclusion that at some point Shaw's redevelops. And what I think this plan does, and I think what the city's commitment to looking at that riparian zone might do, as instituted through policy eventually, is when that becomes redeveloped, the city's priority would be provide meaningful open space that actually engages the river. That's the ask.
Mm-hmm.
They have to provide open space. They have to provide a buffer anyway. You have the regulations say that now. It's the conversation with the redevelopment of that particular property would be, we want to make that not just open space, we want to make it connected and functional open space that's part of this opportunity to see the river, to engage with the river. Because that as I mentioned earlier, that you have a great opportunity to make sure that people see the river not just as a thing that's sort of in a bubble and preserved forever, but it's part of the urban fabric. Right. And I think that would be an opportunity for that to happen.
Well, and I just want to also point out, this space here, which is not, that's not our property.
Yeah. Yes.
But it would make a great
riverfront park, as it's called.
It would be great.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd love to explore what that could look like. And also, so as we're thinking of stormwater, I think at one point I had this conversation with you about let's make this plan really visual.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to reiterate, especially with the stormwater, what does it look like to be robust in terms of
that park space that you just pointed out there, the riverfront park right off the Langdon? We could picture that as being something where you're really integrating stormwater with a kind of a park environment, maybe it's sort of tiered, kind of stepping down to the river, and there could be capturing stormwater and treating it and making it a visual sort of garden-y kind of amenity. So, getting into really detailed plans for any of those individual parcels wasn't really part of this, but we're into that.
Cool, awesome. And I think I saw Glenn and then Donna,
Yeah, just on the question of riverfront spots and thinking about the Main Street Bridge, I'm curious about the south bank of the Winooski at the Main Street Bridge, because on both sides of the bridge there, it is already at least grass and trees and a bench, and we put the winter parking ban sign up on the left side coming into town. I don't know, it's sort of a cliff, but I think it might be worth looking at that.
Sorry, the south side of the Winooski?
Am I wrong saying it that way? So here, I'll just...
Along Memorial Drive?
On your left going...
there is a little park.
That's right. Yes, but it's outside of this zone.
Yeah, it's outside the zone, and I don't know who owns it, but it is green on the river.
Yeah.
We have a bench there.
Yeah.
Cool.
We don't own it? We have a bench there?
No, we do.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think the more you can take advantage of those opportunities along the river to create some public space that people would use,
And I think in in that spot, to me, it might be just a question of looking at it again and thinking about how that's oriented, what the bench is looking at. Right now, it's looking at the intersection, which is fun, but.
Yeah. Exactly. It's facing the intersection. Okay. Yes, Donna.
You asked earlier about the property against the drawing board, and they have it as a semi-rectangular green space there. Now, are they following up on that? Because they don't designate any of the rest as green that's along the shared youth path near that spot that we just did, or our new footbridge.
Are you talking about the empty lot right there?
Yeah.
So we showed that as potential infill or like a pocket park space. So kind of throwing out either option. I think from our general recommendations that we're putting out there is the idea that we had that section that kind of showed the river to Main Street. We think we should try to maybe emphasize the public open space, natural kind of corridor along the river, and then go more towards the infill as you get closer to Main Street. See, in terms of where that priority should happen. So we'd be leaning towards infill, I think, for that spot.
One thing we did talk about in the report, though, you'll see in recommendations, is that if that does get infilled, if it's a building, for example, and again, the uses are going to be driven by the market and the city's priorities and all of those sorts of things. But one of the opportunities that exists is to look at the frontage of that building as it relates to Main Street, maybe a little bit differently. As you can see on the plan, you have a pretty straight line of building facades on Main Street. And one of the things that oftentimes in an urban environment that really makes it dynamic is having some of these forecourts in buildings that provide a little open space in the front of a building. So that would be a great opportunity to argue for a forecourt on a building like that, to allow that frontage to actually have a quasi-public, gathering point, and still be able to provide a productive use in terms of multi-story building.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be, that's one of the things that the strategies are sort of talking about. It's not necessarily finding the big place for an open space. It's trying to make it where you can. And I would also say, and the study talks about this, is even on the roofs of some of these buildings could be green space, open space. So you can look at open space. One of the things I think the study's trying to do is sort of have you think about open space maybe a little bit differently as a city would, in that it's not just necessarily reserved, conserved green space. It can be parklets. It can be forecourts of buildings that have some benches and a little plant area and some art. It can be all of those things can contribute to this civic-minded open space that presents itself to the public.
Lauren, did you have something to add? No. Okay. I think yeah.
Elizabeth, again, probably taking the words out of Dan's mouth, but these are great ideas, and with a little bit of interpretive signage, you could turn this town into, a magnet for people in the state to come learn how to manage stormwater, and they, of course, would want to spend the night. They would want to eat and drink in town and buy stuff. So it would be good.
Are you suggesting stormwater tourism?
Stormwater tourism. There you go.
All the state officials.
Stormwater management tourism.
That would have involved much more intelligent words being in my mouth. No. You glossed over a little bit the point that this plan is dependent on the parking garage. And I know that you here don't need to hear this again, but I want to make the point anyway for the people listening at home, that I think when we talked about the parking garage, we talked about these opportunities where we can, maybe remove some on-street parking spaces in order to improve the pedestrian experience, to create more open space, to create environmental opportunities and stormwater treatment opportunities. This is what we were talking about. So the so-called friends of Montpelier, they're not friends to pedestrians, they're not friends to bicyclists, and they're not friends to the environment when they're opposing the parking garage, because the parking garage is what it would take to provide a new way of looking at our downtown that's going to create great energy, that's going to allow people to park on the outskirts of the core downtown and then have a walking experience that's, you know, full of those moments of excitement and energy that we were talking about. So I think that's really important for everyone to recognize that we need those parking opportunities on the outskirts so that we can reconsider our street. And it's not an efficient use of our streets to have on-street parking. Structured parking is a much more efficient and viable way to have people park. So I just want to reiterate that as we're considering these plans, that but for having a parking garage, they're all pie in the sky dreams, because we need places for people to park, to be able to shop, and to enjoy our downtown. So the parking garage is really critical to this piece. So just want to make sure we're not glossing over that's at the core of this discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Great point, Dan. If some of the existing vacant areas or spots where maybe current landowners are not open to, like next to Charlie O's, there was a park that was built. So like that space there, which I think is essential to have, you know, one of these. How do you deal with that? If you know, or is there a proposal to offer any of these private abandoned sectors? I don't know, you know.
It's a mic question. What we look at, obviously, when we're looking at the downtown, as much as 25 to 30% of the downtown is already owned by the city, in our streets, in our sidewalks, in our parking lots. So there's a lot that we own and control, but obviously there's a lot that we don't as well. And when we develop these plans, we recognize there are going to be opportunities that exist on private property that may be necessary to make connections. And so what we do is we point them out and identify what our opportunities are, and we decide whether that's something that we think is a good idea. And then we recognize that there's obviously a barrier to implementation, and that barrier is the fact that we don't own that property. In some cases, that barrier may be relatively low. We may have a willing partner in the private sector who's willing to work with us and says, hey, great, I can get an advantage out of this because it's better for my customers, it's better for the people who live there. Other people are more challenging to work with when it comes to acquiring property, and we just have to recognize that. So when we highlight something that says, hey, this would be a great place for a park or for redevelopment, we just have to sit down, you know, afterwards and go and say, yeah, that is a great opportunity, but the cost to actually getting that to happen is higher than we're willing to spend. So, but that's a policy decision of the city council. From a planner's perspective, we want to put those opportunities in front of you and say, here's a great opportunity, but here's the barrier that sits there as well. So certainly there are a few examples in here that are privately owned properties that could be redeveloped. And sometimes we get the opportunities. I would point out for something like Shaw's, you know, we mentioned earlier about we can't require public access on a private redevelopment, but almost every large project that has come through the city, they have come asking for a public-private partnership. They would like something from the city to enable their project to move forward. Maybe it's tax stabilization, maybe it's these other things. Now, in the zoning regulations, we can't consider that public access at all. But when somebody comes in for a tax stabilization, when somebody comes in for a public-private partnership to say, hey, I can do this great project, but I need some help from the city, that's when you have the opportunity to go and say, well, if we're going to help you out, I want you to help us out. We'd love to go and use your riparian buffer as an opportunity for us to have some green space. And that's where these public-private partnerships come in. We can't do it through zoning, but we can do it through other tools. And certainly when somebody comes to you with their hand out for an assistance on a project, there's an opportunity for you to work with them to make an agreement.
Great. Any further comments? Okay. Thank you for all your time and effort on this project. It's great. I'm looking forward to
do it
moving
again
forward.
in March.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there's, for anyone who's listening or anyone on the council, you know, we did put they did put together this recommendation, just so that way you guys have it in front of you, could start getting input and comment from folks in the community, and you can send us questions, and the whole point is to get this out here and get another little round of conversation going. We're not looking to kind of reopen everything for restudy, but we do want to hear where there might be things that maybe we overlooked that we should take another look at. So
Donna.
we'll be back one more time.
Oh, okay, what's my question? So you'll be back one more time?
Yes.
Okay, so it's really important the public also understands that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just make one more comment? Could Patrick and Mark make the boards available that were here in this room some months ago to
Put out
have
the
a show
hallway, that'd
in
be
the
great.
hallway so that people can just drop in and get a,
Put them out in the hallway.
Yeah.
We wouldn't give you the boards from a couple of months ago because they've changed.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
The current ones.
Yes. Yeah.
That'd be great.
That would be helpful.
Super.
Especially town meeting.
day.
Yeah. that'd be
Town
great.
meeting would be good.
Glenn, did you have something?
Nope.
No? Okay. Anything further? No? Yeah.
Hello, my name's David Papkirski. I was just curious, what is the timeline for starting and finishing?
The construction?
This summer.
By January?
Just a
No.
question.
It's, so the initial concept of this plan actually comes from the fact that we can look ahead and know that the Rialto Bridge was going to need to get reconstructed at some point, and so we were actually looking specifically at State Street, and then it grew into the downtown. The idea is we don't really know when we would be starting, but in order to build it into a project, we need to have first the master plan identified. What do we want to see? Do we want bike lanes or not want bike lanes? Do we want on-street parking or not want on-street parking? We needed the big questions answered so we can start building some plans, so that way when the Rialto Bridge is replaced, we can also do the sidewalks on either end of it. The question of when we would start a project like this is, it's up to a lot of projects, funding, the will of people willing to bond and spend money. But we wanted to get the plans going, and it would be something that would take a little bit of time. It's not something that's going to be in next year's budget. It's going to take some time.
I guess I thought we were going to sort of piecemeal it, because the Rialto Bridge is moving along. I mean, in the regional TAC, we see it at 2.5, 3 years.
Yeah, if that's
And
happening that
so
quick, then
if
we'll
we
be-
don't have this plan in place, then that gets done. But so we want to have the plan in place so
Yes.
we can do that and do it the way we want it. And likewise, every time we have another capital improvement grant, it's just an opportunity to know where we want to go. So I don't see it as a big, whoop, here we are. I see it bit by bit happening as we get the money and the grants to do it.
Yes, and I think Bill and Donna would probably agree with that it's probably not one big bond for $16 million and start the big dig. It's going to be it'll be a piecemeal project, and as I said, the timing really comes in where the opportunities present themselves, and one will be the Rialto Bridge. If that's in 2.5 years, then we're probably needing to hustle to get to what these guys would be going and getting into design and getting design documents, so that way they're in place in time for the bid bridge, because you would bid the entire project. So.
Mike's right. There's probably about a 2-year plus time lag between the idea and design drawings, because there is going to be some permitting, there is going to be some landowner negotiation, there is going to be, obviously, the level of detail will get considerably refined relative to the concept that's presented. So if it's 3 years, that clock tower thing is looking better every minute.
Okay. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so it is a little after 9. Yes, Donna?
I would request a break.
So here's my proposal. I would like to be leaving here at least by 10. And I would love to reserve an hour to do the city manager evaluation. It's going to be probably less than that now. So
That's okay, I'll just leave, that's okay.
No. Well, so what I would propose is that we push off the legislative agenda piece until next meeting. Unfortunately, I'm sorry.
You know the session ends.
I know. Well, we were late to start anyway, so.
2 minutes.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, with the idea of a legislative. Anyway, so if we could take that, if you're okay with that, team,
Yeah, like the one thing I'd say is, I think at the very least, somebody, whether it be a volunteer, and I can probably take a whack at it, should look through all the committee schedules every week to see what are on the agendas and interesting. Today, 2 things came up, and I looked at it. It's a pilot mobile mental health unit for the city of Rutland to deal with homeless population that they're asking $400,000 for. So we're fighting over peanuts here. You know, we should be in there looking at stuff like that. State employee parking was on the agenda today in Senate Government Operations. I think we should be in the conversation on those things. So at the very least, just looking at the agendas for the week. Hey, Ken Russell, maybe you should pop over there and check it out.
So one possibility is that we do council reports now and then go into executive session. Do you want to take a break before?
My body, I'm going.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
I'll be back.
Okay. So we'll take that up, but thank you.
Okay.
Point is well taken.
Yep, good idea.
Okay, but we're going to move to council reports, and then we'll, after we're through that, we'll go into executive session to do the city manager's evaluation. So, Donna not being here, with whom I usually start. Connor, you
I'll pass.
Okay, Glenn?
I think all I have to say is I'll be at Bagito's tomorrow morning, as usual, 8:30 to 9:30. Yeah.
Great. Dan?
I wanted to thank ORCA for setting up interviews for all of the candidates that are currently running, as well as the city manager and the school board, of talking about budgets with the superintendent. And I would encourage everyone to watch all of them, maybe not in their entire length. You can fast forward through mine. But I think it's a really good way to sort of get an idea of what the issues are outside of sitting through all of these city council meetings.
Jack?
A while back, we said we would start having council members report on the committees they're working on, and I thought this is probably a reasonable time to report on what's happening with the Main Street Middle School Committee. You know, we've been meeting since September or something like that, and we meet once a month, and we're making progress. We've been gathering information, including surveying the teachers, and we'll be doing the same thing or a similar survey or other mechanism to obtain feedback from students at the school. Another part of the charge of the committee is considering if there are alternative locations for a school if we conclude that it's not going to be possible to meet the needs in the current location. And we've done a lot of work of evaluating the space in the school and what used to be the school construction standards and things that maybe the school has or doesn't have that really should have. And so we're working on developing design ideas for what could be done in the building in its current location and how we could meet those needs. But we're also starting to look at the question of whether there are locations within the city that would also serve to be good sites for the school. Probably in about 2 months, we'll be doing a report at the school board, and the project is planned to wrap up at the end of this year, so in December. And it's not going to be, here's the decision about whether we're going to build a new school and where, but it's going to be fleshing out a lot of the ideas that would go into that decision and some of the alternatives to meet the educational needs of the district. And Dan is also on that committee.
Accurate report.
Just a couple quick things. There is, I believe, next meeting, we're going to be hoping to appoint someone to the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District as the alternate on that. Would love if somebody would throw their hat in the ring if people haven't already. That would be great. Lots of exciting stuff going on in terms of mandatory composting statewide going into effect July of this year, and other really interesting changes in what's happening. So it'd be great to have some good volunteers coming forward for that. For the Social and Economic Justice Advisory Committee that I serve on for the council, just noting there is out right now a request for proposals. So if anybody knows of any groups or is somebody who works on social and economic justice issues, check out that RFP and consider submitting an application to work with the city. So there's a lot of details in there of the kind of work that we're looking for, but hope we get some great interest in applicants for that. That group also, because it will be this really interesting time of working through that process with a consultant and really kind of advancing the mission of that group, also looking for members for that group. So if anyone's interested, would love to encourage people to participate in that. And the last thing I just wanted to mention, I had emailed the council, but some of you might have seen the report on the PFAS contamination coming out of our wastewater treatment facility, and I know we're going to put that on a future agenda. So just wanted to note, though, like certainly your city councilors saw that, and it's an issue we'll be looking at and trying to get a better grasp of what the city's options and obligations are. So I look forward to that discussion. And that's it for this week. Thanks.
Donna.
So my last?
Yeah. You're last.
Oh, last. Well, I really want to thank ORCA and Richard Scheer for our interview. Connor and I shared it. But he interviewed all the candidates. He interviewed the city manager, the school superintendent. I mean, it's just amazing. So people should go on to ORCA and look at these discussions of your schools and your city government. And I also want to say I had a delightful conversation about integrating school transportation with public transit with VEEP, Vermont Energy Education Program. And they've got some ideas for some pilot projects that are really exciting.
Cool. Glenn?
Sorry, I forgot until just now. I promised a constituent, Jessica Sanderson of Berlin Street, that I would pass on a message that I got from her. I'll forward it to the rest of you, but the gist is she is strongly concerned about the snow removal in the city. Walking and driving is getting more and more difficult, and is concerned that we do not have an adequate budget for snow removal. So I will forward that along. And apologies to Jessica for not remembering it until just now. I know I promised. So it is.
Great. So just a couple points for me. So I'll also be having office hours, but that will be next Tuesday, 3:30 to 4:30, right here at City Hall. I want to make a note that for the City Council, we had Donna reminded me that we do self-evaluations as well. I sent out a survey for that. Don't think that that's something that we can do in executive session, but maybe that's a conversation we can reserve for a time at the end, during the council reports, just some time to reflect on that. But filling out that survey would be useful. So I'll send that out again later on, and obviously Dan being new, don't feel obligated.
I won't.
Okay.
It's great.
Do you have a deadline? I work much better with deadlines.
Okay, so if that were
Well, if you're going to do it with this group, you have one more meeting. after
exactly
tonight.
right. So the 26th. It'd be great to do that on the 26th. So, and really that means ideally getting it done by the 20th, which is a week from tomorrow. Okay. All right, so then I just want to also make a note that at one point we had hoped to have the home energy information ordinance on tonight's agenda. We had, because we had it planned for tonight's agenda, that pushed the group to do a few things to get some feedback from lawyers, and we met with realtors, and both of those things were very fruitful, and so and had substantive enough suggestions that we were like, okay, we want to take some time and digest this and come back to the council with something more that integrates the suggestions and also just considers all the things that were brought up. So just want to make a note about that. And then on a slightly different note, I just want to make a note for the public that the census is coming up, and starting in March, that people will start to be receiving information about that. And the census is really important for us in order to, it's tied to basically funding for a lot of different areas. So that translates for us into more resources. I just wanted to put that out there, and that is it for me. Crystal, do you have anything?
I will just remind people that taxes are coming due with the weekend and the Monday holiday. They will be due on Tuesday, the 18th.
And for me, thank you, Crystal, for reminding me to remind everyone that Monday is President's Day holiday, so City Hall will be closed. Tomorrow is Vermont League of Cities and Towns Local Government Day, so local government officials from around the state will be gathering, first at the Capitol Plaza, then at the State House, to talk about local government issues. I was anxiously looking forward to bringing our agenda with us, but maybe we'll co-opt some of the ideas anyway, and I will be involved in that. Cameron will be there. I think Donna Barlow-Casey is going to that. Our goal is to have a report on the PFAS for Friday's packet when it comes out. I think they're going to make it. DPW, if not, it'll be first of next week, just to take that. So appreciate that. Police chief ads are out. We have begun that process. We've already had 2 applications. It's due, I think, March 16, is that right? So there's some time, and we're going to be doing, in the meantime, we're doing some outreach with community groups and others to get some feedback about what they'd like to see in the next police chief. So certainly I'm interested in hearing from any of you if you want to share your thoughts with me. Snow removal was mentioned, and I wanted to mention it as well. It isn't really a budget issue. We had a major problem this week. If anyone's seen our snow removal operation, we rent very large trucks, and they get filled, and they haul off and dump them, and then another truck comes in and gets filled, and it's the most efficient way to do that. And this particular week, we actually planned to do snow removal last night. And due to an emergency with the truck provider, those trucks weren't available. So for us to do it with just the small trucks, we get a lot less done. It's a lot less efficient. And with the storm coming potentially tonight, we would have had our crews too burned out to do them that way. There will be a plan, even if it is doing it with the inefficient small trucks after this snow, to get cleaned up for the weekend. And around schools, we recognize it's bad. It should have been done, but was not actually able to be done. And we tried to send out a notice through Facebook and other social media providers, but it's not, we do budget for the truck rentals. We do budget for the overtime to do it. That was what happened this week.
Okay. All right, so is there a motion to go into executive session?
I move we enter into executive session to discuss the evaluation of a public officer or employee pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313A3.
I'll second it.
Okay, and I just want to note that we will not be coming back to do any business. Noting that, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, great. Thank you all.